Hey guys, welcome back to Brian's Mysteries and Adventures on Trail, and today's case is absolutely incredible. After reading and researching this case, it just blew me away. And this case happened back in May of this year, so May of 2021. It happened in Oregon, and the guy's name is Harry Burleigh, 69 years old. Very experienced outdoorsman. This guy is almost 70 years old, and the majority of his life he spent camping, hiking, fishing. He loves to fish, and this particular weekend he was out fishing. This was only supposed to be an overnight trip. And he ended up being lost in the Oregon wilderness for 17 days. And that is just incredible, because really that's pushing the upper limits of how long somebody can survive with no food, no water. And we're going to get into the case, but I wanted to say offhand, a lot of this is going to be in his own words because they are his words and I don't want to change them. And the way he expresses himself is just amazing. I mean, this guy is just so full of love and life spirit. I mean, when you hear some of the way that he handled this, it is just incredible, and it's just so inspiring, and it just goes to show you that having a good mindset, staying calm, and just thinking things through and having a positive attitude can really make all the difference in the world. So let's get into this case and talk about what happened. So Harry Burleigh, having been cooped up with COVID over the last year, wanted to get out and do some fishing. So he went out, and this was just going to be an overnight trip, and the first morning he was fishing from his kayak, and he said that he was doing well. He caught a bunch of fish, and he wasn't keeping them, he just threw them back. And he decided that after the wind started picking up, it was just getting too bad for him to be out there in his kayak. So he packed up the kayak, put it on his truck, and he headed out, and he was trying to figure out what he was going to do. So he went back down the highway 138 towards Roseburg, which is where he was from. He said that since it was still very early in the afternoon, plenty of daylight, he wanted to do a little bit more fishing. So he decided that he was going to try and go to Twin Lakes. He reported following up a road about 10 miles up a pretty steep incline, but he finally made it to the trailhead at approximately 4 p.m. He filled out a sign-in card and left it on his dash saying that he would be back tonight. And then he started the trail, thinking it was only 1.25 miles up from where he was starting. Now, as he set out for this hike, he was wearing a double layered clothing, but since in his mind it was a short hike and he was only going to do a few casts, he felt that he didn't need to carry more than what he really felt was necessary. So he didn't carry a compass, no map, no hat, not even a water bottle. Again, his thoughts was that it was only 1.25 miles, so even his footwear was only a pair of socks and a pair of leather hiking sandals, which he said were great in the kayak, but once he got on the trail, he realized it wasn't so great. And he even said that he didn't even pack his extra shirt. And he does admit that these were big mistakes. And, he says that, just being out of the loop for a while, he just made some mistakes, and he says he should have known better. But I love the way that he is so upfront and admits to that, and he just went with the stride of everything. So anyway, Harry set out for Toketee Lake, and at this point his wife, Stacy Burleigh, she wasn't worried because she knew that he might be staying out for another night. However, little did she know Harry was getting further and further from his desired fishing hold. Harry reported that it was a brisk hike through deep, tall timber, and he said, quote, "It smelled gorgeous." I just love the words he used. And he said by Thursday, he crossed a little stream, went a little further, and then that's where he ran into snow. And he does admit that this probably would have been a good point to turn around. However, at this juncture, he felt that, he still knew where the trail was, and he wasn't lost, so he decided to stay on trail. What Harry didn't realize, that the trail to Twin Lakes takes a hard turn there at that junction, and his wrong turn, he missed that turn, and this is where he started realizing that he was lost. He reported that around 5:15, when it was starting to get dark, this is when he realized he was going to be spending the night out in the woods, and he knew that it was going to be getting cold. So at first he decided he didn't have a hat. What he did was he cut up the cover of his fishing reel, and used that as sort of a bandana. But then he thought to himself, well, why do I need underwear? I'll just go commando. And he sewed up one of the legs and made that into a hat, which was actually a really smart idea because over 60% of your body heat is lost through your head. So if you're ever out in the woods or stranded somewhere, wearing a hat is a really good way to preserve your body heat. Harry took some deep breaths and he thought to himself, he felt like he knew where he was, that he had awareness of the terrain, but then he realized he didn't, and his map and compass were all back in the car at the trailhead. There was no cell service, so he couldn't call anybody, and he knew he was just going to have to figure a way to not only stay alive, but figure a way out. So that night he found himself on a steep slope. He concocted a makeshift shelter, although he reported that he really didn't sleep. Soon as the sun came up on Friday morning, he was greeted with a fresh blanket of snow, and he realized that ironically he was in an area called Deception Creek, and he felt to himself, well, at least he knew he was well off track, but he knew sort of where he was. He came across a big rock ledge with two large logs long enough for him to head down into the ravine to the creek, because at this point he didn't have any water. Unfortunately, when he was going down off one of the logs, he lost his balance. He says that his head bounced off the second log. He landed on his fishing pole, which was attached to his belt, and that reel jammed into his hip. He came to the realization, he told himself that he knew that he had done everything wrong, but he couldn't beat himself up. He had to stay focused and do something and just do his best and not to expect more. And again, I think that's just a great attitude, and it really helped him get through this. Meanwhile, back at home, Stacy, his wife, had called the authorities. She had waited the 24 hours and they had begun a massive search. Stacy Burleigh reported that the authorities and the SAR were just a godsend for her. The Douglas County Sheriff's Office called her every day. She said it was very hard, but it was very encouraging that she had them on her side. Back in the forests of Oregon, however, her husband, Harry, was now lost in even more difficult and rugged terrain, and he now had a skewed sense of his direction. 2 days after Harry Burleigh took his wrong turn, his son Kalen came up and joined his mom to support her and help with the searches in local areas, some of the areas that weren't as difficult of terrain. At this point, Harry had reached the confluence of Twin and Calf Creeks, and he decided to shelter there. He had not eaten in days, so he was trying to get water, and he used fern branches under a low cover of a Douglas fir that he was able to build a shelter to minimize the elements. He did try and start a fire by rubbing two sticks together. However, that didn't work, and then he remembered that his father-in-law had given him this little plastic magnifying glass 40 years ago, and he had never used it. He had just transferred it to every new wallet he got, and he was able to start a fire using that magnifying glass and the sticks. Unfortunately, the wood that he had collected was so dry that it burned up all the next morning, and then he was out of wood. He did try and burn some moss and other things to create a smoke screen to signal, for help. Unfortunately, the canopy of the flora and fauna and trees was just so thick that the smoke was never able to get out of that canopy. He did say that he saw planes flying over, and he did try and wave his arms, took off his jacket, threw that around, used his keys, anything he could to show reflecting light. But what he says is that when the plane was flying over, he blessed them, and he still blesses them now. And he says this pilot was trying to see something in the hole in the trees, and there's a gazillion of these holes, and it's almost impossible. It's like finding a needle in a haystack, which really is so true. But it's just so, his attitude, he didn't get depressed, he didn't get frustrated, he just sort of went with things. During this time, all he had to eat were some millipedes, some termites, a snail, and he said that he found one crawfish. And it got so bad at one point where he was so dehydrated and far from water that he did have to drink his own urine. This occurred when Harry tried to reach higher ground and construct an SOS out of logs to, again, hopefully signal anybody that might have been flying over. On day 10 of the search, Stacy and her son Kylan, they were out with the search and rescue with their own GPS units, looking and trying to find Harry. Harry's original camp was found near the confluence of Twin and Calf Creeks. Obviously he wasn't there, but after the family saw the pictures, they knew that that was in fact Harry's tackle box, and this gave them a new, renewed sense of optimism. Unfortunately, by day 12, things were really starting to begin unraveling for Harry. He had left the outpost on the ridge to try and follow a creek that he would believe lead him back to Twin Lakes and ultimately to the mile quarter out of the wilderness. Well, he came to a sheer rock wall alongside a waterfall, which he says that he was just mesmerized by. And he saw a possible path to the top, but he knew it was going to be difficult for what he called an already worn-out old 69-year-old man. I mean, even all through all this, he had a great sense of humor, and I just love it. Harry said that he made it about halfway up, but he was just taking serious tumbles, and he said at that point, one of his sandals just completely disintegrated. He was now some 50 miles away from home, and unfortunately his son Kylan had to return back to Tucson, and now his wife was by herself going through this, and it was understandable. He had to go back, his children were there, he had a job interview, but Stacy Burleigh just said that it was the daily calls from the deputy ward from the sheriff's office that really kept her going. And there was a huge search involved in this. Over 16 different agencies were involved in this search. And although Harry was now mentally and physically drained, he knew that he just had to keep putting one foot in front of the other. And he just kept telling himself, just one more day until I can see my wife. Now on May 23rd, he heard something. That morning he heard a yell through the woods, and he thought to himself, wow, that's a human voice. So he replied in his kind voice with all the energy he said he could muster. The first rescuer showed up and sat down next to him, and he recalled he just said that more rescuers started coming up. They helped bandage his feet, they gave him a bottle of Gatorade, they gave him some food, and as more and more searchers came up, he just felt this overwhelming sense of joy. And he recalled, referring to the Gatorade, that was, quote, God's own stash of honey. This is a picture of Harry's makeshift shelter that they found when they found him. And you can see, this guy had some pretty good outdoor skills, especially after being out there for 17 days. This is a map of where he started and where they, initially found or finally found him, where he tried to go, etc. Harry was obviously transported by helicopter to the Peace Health Sacred Heart Medical Center, and he spent 12 days there, first in the ICU. He was suffering from malnutrition, dehydration, hypothermia, gastrointestinal issues, not to mention the fact that his feet were completely swelled up. He had lost, he went from about 180 some odd pounds down to 152 pounds. But he joked the whole time during the recent conversation. He noticed that during his his recovery, he shows in this picture, he's flexing because, he had slimmed down, so now his muscles were more ripped. And I just loved his whole attitude through this. And, he's recovering well. He had some nerve damage, but he's expected to make a full recovery. And he said during this time, what he could have, easily died, or, his soul was actually enriched. And this is what he said. He said that he left that mountaintop with something I didn't have before. My body was beaten beyond what it could give, he said. My mind was stretched beyond what I thought I could do. But my life spark, that loving energy that we have inside of us, that was filled. And I just think that's just so awesome. This guy, survived 17 days out in the wilderness on his own. And I'd like to dedicate this video to Harry Burleigh. You're just so inspirational, and this is just such an awesome story of courage and willpower. Yeah, I just thought it was amazing. I want to thank you all for watching, as always. And again, please keep the comments respectful if you choose to leave them. And special thank you to co.ag for providing the background music. Both Harry and the Sheriff's Office would like people to be reminded of the 10 essentials for survival: navigation, a headlamp or flashlight, sunglasses and sunscreen, first aid supplies, fire, knife, shelter, extra clothing, extra food, and extra water. And again, I always recommend a satellite device as well, and an emergency blanket. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. I will see you guys in the next one. Take care.